Yeah, it's a fantastic success story. Globally, the markets for U.S. pork continue to expand. We're now exporting roughly 24% of our domestic production. And as we just went through in the meeting, I said in November, 7% of our entire pork production was consumed in China. 7% of our pork went to China. 6% of our pork production went to Japan in November. So you start thinking about how big of a factor that is in our domestic meat complex. It's a big deal.
Your company looks at domestic or export markets, does that market research, looks to places where export demand can grow, where there are inroads. As you look forward, is it only going? It's not only going to be about China, but is China really one of the main places that the meat export market and the pork export market kind of focus on? Is there a tremendous upside of growth there?
Oh, there is in China, but I think there are in a lot of markets. As you look at global pork production, really pork production, poultry production is a function of grain price. We have a very abundant, affordable grain supply here. We can produce pork cheaper in North America than pretty much anywhere on the planet. Today, our domestic pork prices are half what they are in China. China is paying double for pork what we are today. They're doing it on 1/5 of our income. They're paying double. And so you look at that, of course, China holds enormous potential, biggest pork producing and consuming market on the planet. Over half the hogs in the world live in China. But there are a lot of markets around the world where I see great potential. I think the collective others market, when you look at all these lesser markets and the potential to really build a presence in there, countries even like Colombia, where we just have a recent free trade agreement, Colombia could be a very nice market for us going forward. It's got a good population, good per capita income growth rate, but even Southeast Asia, Philippines, some of these lesser markets, Vietnam, we're shipping a lot more pork to Vietnam, all over the world. When you can produce as competitively as we can, there's a lot of potential around the globe.
You talked about how the grain prices here in the United States make pork production, livestock production, cheaper than other places, even with the run-up that we saw, say, in late last summer of higher feed prices, higher corn prices, higher grain prices. Is that mitigated then a bit because of it's already so expensive overseas?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. You know, we've all felt this high grain pain in the livestock industry the last few years. But I was looking at Chinese corn prices just the other day. They were $9.70 a bushel. U.S. equivalent of corn in China today is $9.70, and we're, $6.40. So, yeah, the Chinese corn price basis spreads anywhere from $1.50 to $4 a bushel more than our corn does. It's all supply and demand and freight and tariffs. As high as our prices have been, they're higher other places.
The demand for all cuts, all types of meat overseas, is there a market that the U.S. producer can exploit because something isn't eaten here as much in the United States, but it's consumed somewhere else on the globe?
Yeah, and that's a fantastic value prospect of being a global participant, is our variety meats, offal, organs, whatever it is, stomach, kidneys, intestines, feet, femur bones, neck bones, all those things, tails, snouts, have a great home overseas. China, Hong Kong, for example, they're major buyers of variety meats as well as pork. But there are a lot of people on the planet that value a lot of cuts differently than we do. So being plugged into that international market ensures that our producers get the highest price for each cut, regardless of where those consumers live.
Your company, not too long ago, did a research study in China about their pork production output. What did you kind of learn from them? What's kind of the larger takeaway there as it affects pork production here in the U.S. and in Illinois?
Well, China will continue to affect us in a big way, our domestic pork markets. Yeah, we were over there in October last year, September, October, just doing a top-to-bottom look at the Chinese hog sector. And the reason was, in 2008, China had massive disease problems. Their prices went record high and imports flowed in very heavily. That same thing happened in 2011, maybe to a higher degree. Chinese pork prices went far beyond those 2008 prices, record highs. Right now, Chinese hog prices, if I convert them to a U.S. dollars per hundredweight equivalent on a carcass basis, their prices are $90 a hundredweight higher last week than our carcass prices were, more than double. So we're in a situation where that spread is $90 a hundredweight. We can pack carcasses in boxes and ship them to China easily and pay freight, duties, tariffs, and ship lots and lots of pork. Bottom line out of that trip was China has some fundamental issues in dealing with hog diseases. And they have a lot higher density rates than we do with hogs. They have some real disease problems that are not fixed, and they don't have a system in place yet to fix those disease issues. I don't know what the solution is. Bottom line, they have very high pork prices, and they're going to continue to be much bigger buyers.
American meat, pork, poultry, beef, is it always going to be well received overseas? Is there work to be done in some export markets to make sure that access exists for U.S. produced meat?
Yeah, there is, and that's the real challenge. I mean, every country wants to be self-reliant on food. I think it's just a human nature that we don't want to be dependent on other countries for food. Some countries have gotten more comfortable with that, like Japan, where over half of their caloric intake is now imported. A country like China said, we want 100% self-sufficiency. Now, with China, last year they imported a record volume of pork. It was 1% of their consumption. So they were 99% self-sufficient last year. So there's a lot of room to grow there. But yeah, access issues continue to encumber what we can do internationally. That's really the constraint. The economics work. It's just a matter of who will let us in. And there's always a pressure to try and maintain that self-sufficiency that other countries have. But in a period like we have now where prices are very high, global prices are record high on pork, it takes a lot of the friction out of those arguments. When these countries see these high food prices, they get very concerned about social stability and other things. And I think the high prices lend some support to us, kind of remove the friction in those trade discussions.
They talk about the value added in per export when American products are going overseas. Is there ever a concern that added value then drives the market price up too high in the United States to be competitive if there's always extra value overseas and the price increases here domestically?
Well, I guess that's a fair question. Does that global demand drive our prices up to where we're not competitive? Today, North American pork prices are significantly lower than Brazil, Mexico, Europe, China, Russia. I mean, to the point, I'm not too concerned about that. I think as pork producers here in the U.S., we want to get the maximum value for every cut. We want it to go where if it has to go to Asia, Russia, wherever it has to go, we want the highest value for those cuts. And, I'm not too concerned about the value pushing us into non-competition. There is concern, though, and I'd just like to mention this. A lot of people in the industry say, hey, we're exporting almost 1/4 of our production. We've become very dependent on these international markets. Some people feel like we've increased our risk in doing that. Now, if we have trade bans, we're going to be in trouble. Now, I can tell you, I could chart exports as a percent of production of all the major pork exporters in the world. We're the lowest. Canada exports far more percent of their production. Europe exports a much bigger percent of their production. But on the flip side, I would almost take the contrarian approach that what we've done is diversified our risk. Rather than, especially I guess since you see the 2008 recession, we're sitting here in a recession and all of a sudden we're not 100% dependent on U.S. consumers. We can go, if the U.S. economy's weak, we can ship pork to places where the economies aren't weak, like Korea, like China. All these countries around the world that are having rising incomes, the more countries we can ship pork to, the more diversified our risk becomes, in my opinion.
Where will be in your opinion, the next big export market for U.S. pork and meat products?
Well, the Asian region is really fueling the growth today. That's not the only region that's growing, but it's the big growth region. And I think the real potential to continue to see massive growth is through China. Like I said, they imported $4 billion worth of pork, over 115,000 container loads last year, and it was still only 1% of their consumption. And so here they're sitting with prices double our price. We have enormous growth potential into China. I think if you look at things in terms of value and what we can really get done over the next 10 years, I think Japan holds enormous potential. Even with a declining population, based on the value prospect of how competitive we are vis-a-vis their domestic products. But again, the lesser other markets collectively around the globe provide enormous potential as well.
When pork is shipped overseas to, say, China, Japan, wherever, Korea, wherever it winds up, is it marketed as U.S. pork, or does it just kind of go into the stream of pork and is just kind of absorbed into whatever else is produced and whatever else is imported?
Well, it just depends where it goes and what the end users are. Like today, most of the pork that we ship into China goes into further processing. It goes into sausages. It goes into cured products, a lot of different things, mainly because China is a fresh market. The pork, it's a warm pork market. Most of the pork's never refrigerated. It's killed that day and eaten that day. And so frozen imported pork is a very unique product, and therefore it goes mostly into processing. But it's promoted everywhere we can get value from it. It's promoted as U.S. pork. In Japan, you can go through the retail aisles of a Japanese supermarket and see the U.S. branded pork versus the domestic pork. Just depends on the market and what the cuts are.